Hi, I'm Rob Stillwell and I'm a Senior Learning Technologist here at Plymouth. Today I'm speaking to Gary Strong, who's a lecturer in paramedic practice. We're going to be talking about Moodle and how Gary has used it in the past. So Gary, to begin, give us a little bit of background about yourself and how you first encountered Moodle.
Yeah, certainly, Rob. I've been a paramedic since the early 1990s. I trained in the days when paramedics were trained by their local ambulance service. I've been in paramedic education for about 12 years now, initially as an in-service trainer for the old Gloucestershire ambulance service. And a few years ago, I got the opportunity to go out to New Zealand as the training manager for Wellington Free Ambulance. Wellington Free Ambulance has a very close relationship with Whitireia Community Polytechnic, who provide one of two degree programs for paramedics in New Zealand. And it was as a part of that relationship, if you like, between the ambulance service and the Polytechnic that I discovered a little bit about what Moodle was and got the opportunity to learn to use it and eventually learn to love it, I think.
How did you first come across Moodle and how did you feel about it?
Yeah, it was interesting because it really was a means to an end. We were looking for a way of offering a qualification for paramedics without them having to have a big heavy on-campus attendance. And I suppose there was a little bit of personal skepticism there, because even though I was starting to lead a project on implementing this distance learning version of the degree, at the back of my mind I thought, is this really going to work? Because we're such a hands-on branch of healthcare, if you like, how can we actually make something work in this environment? And I guess added to that on the personal front, you know, I'm not a technical person. I was probably one of the last to get a mobile phone, and I'm sure I've been one of the last of my colleagues to get an iPad.
So when it first came to using Moodle, how did you and the programme team approach that?
We had a lot of discussions, a lot of ideas thrown in. In my experience, people who teach in healthcare often have some very creative ideas, and the more we talked, the more we evolved our plans and our dreams, if you like. And a lot of those plans and dreams involved using a lot of video, podcasting, interactive stuff, a lot of tools that actually we didn't really have any experience of. We just knew that they existed and knew that they would be valuable. Along the way, I think we started to learn what for me is the key lesson, that it's less about the tools and the technology that you've got, and it's far more about having a strong learning and teaching methodology. If we develop our understanding of how students learn, how students engage with the process of learning, and apply that to the web-based environment, then we're more likely to get successful results. That was a big lesson. It took quite a bit of time for that to evolve.
So what do you feel helped you and the team most when planning this?
I think there are a number of features that helped. It's certainly getting good institutional support, good technical support, but I think a good educational leadership was really important. What I wasn't aware of at the time was that the Associate Dean was doing a bit of personal research on developing a blended learning approach for nurses in New Zealand. And she came up with a framework which we started to apply to our planning. Its framework is known as LATAR, and LATAR is simply an acronym that covers 5 stages of putting together your learning and teaching methodology. So you start with L, which is the learning outcomes. Then we look at the assessment, because we know that assessment drives learning, that students will always want to know what they've got to do to pass, what they've got to do to achieve. So if we can design meaningful assessments that assess accurately against the learning outcomes, then we have the end goal of the journey, if you like, as far as the student's concerned, which is achieving those assessments. So that's L and A, and then only then do you get to T, which is topics. And I think topics is actually your subject matter, and it's where, when most of us start as teachers, if you're inexperienced, you tend to start with the subject matter and want to teach and download everything to the student. And we know from classroom experience that that can be a bit of a mistake. You know, a long lecture that tries to include everything in a classroom will lose your students. And the same thing applies in the virtual environment. A long piece of script, if you like, on a web page is going to bore someone. So you have to select from your topics appropriately against that journey towards the assessments and the learning outcomes. So we've got L, A, T. Then comes A and R, your activities and your resources. And that's when you start to ask, what kind of meaningful activities can I engage a student in who's sitting at a computer? How do I keep them involved in the learning process so they keep wanting to learn? And once I've dreamt, because you can do a bit of dreaming on this, anything's possible with the technology. Once I've dreamt up those activities, then what resources do I need to make them real and make them happen?
It sounds like that would fit nicely into the way Moodle's kind of structured as well, actually. Things like topics, there's actually the topic blocks within Moodle. So as you're suggesting, you could perhaps block your content in that way, or your subject matter.
Absolutely, because as with a face-to-face delivery, we want students to read the module handbook to start with and find out what the learning outcomes and the assessments are going to be. So starting at the top of Moodle with your overall goal, you can then work topic by topic through. Moodle allows you to do that in a number of different ways, which you can adapt to your own program and purposes.
When using Moodle, what features did you find most useful?
I think the thing I want to say up front to that, Rob, is its flexibility for allowing you to do what you want to do to keep your students engaged and involved. There are any number of technical add-ons that you can plug in, and that I think is sometimes where people get a little bit scared. But what you should do, as with anything new, is learn it one step at a time. A good way to start is just think of this concept of student engagement and set up a discussion forum, for example. Discussion forums are an area that, again, I was a little bit skeptical of to start with, because I looked at what was being created and I thought, well, aren't students just having a chat here? Isn't this a bit like being on Facebook? I wanted to see some proper academic work, so to speak, in inverted commas. But what I find in observing the realities of student discussion is that when they engage with a subject, they really engage. So, for example, in our world, we might set them a case scenario and the student will pitch in with first priorities and another student will pitch in with, have you remembered this? And another one might come in with elements of a secondary survey, and so on and so on. Before you know where you are, you've created quite an engaging piece of learning.
So problem-based learning.
It is problem-based learning, and problem-based learning with the advantage that it can be done asynchronously. But there are some other useful features. For example, if you want your learning to be staged week by week, you simply hide next week's until they finish this week's. Moodle is very good at allowing you to only reveal to the students what you want to reveal. You can even relate that to a formative assessment if you like, and you must pass this quiz before you're allowed into next week's module, or next week's part of the module.
So you can front load sessions effectively with the content. Excellent.
Yeah. And what that leads into is the idea that if you prepare students well for time in the classroom, you can make much more effective use of your classroom time. Now, we didn't know it at the time, but the buzzword for that is the flipped classroom. The idea that you do all the preparatory work before coming to class and then engage in a meaningful activity in class, which for us might be a clinical simulation, it might be a discussion on an ethical issue. But the point of it is that students are well prepared before they actually get there.
So whilst the students are busy, doing all this work online, what is it you're doing as the tutor during that time?
That's a really good question, actually, Rob, because I guess there is a little bit of a fear that you've taken my classroom away, what am I going to do now? What I actually need to do is maintain an online presence. I need to be there while the students are discussing, while they're answering quizzes, while they're working, and there's a number of ways you can do that. But essentially, engaging in regular feedback, there seems to be the evidence that that's what students like. So one way I can be there is by waiting until they've done a few days discussion work and then moderating that discussion and putting in my tutor's slant on the particular case that they've dealt with. Again, it's problem-based learning. Another important way to do that is record yourself. whether it's as a podcast or a video, but just make your presence felt. One of my colleagues used to, he was the leader for the third year cohort, and each week he would record a little 2 or 3 minute video podcast, checking that students had done the work for that week, asking them how they got on, chatting generally, and the cool thing about the way Sean did it was always from a different location around the city. He just took his laptop out and did a little recording. So students loved that because it was a bit of fun. Somebody was showing that they cared about where their learning was up to, and it really kept them engaged.
So having taught with Moodle for a few years now, how do you feel it's affected your teaching, and also has your view of the tool itself changed?
Yeah, I think those two questions are quite closely related actually, Rob, because the more I've used it, the more I've come to value the dimensions it adds to the whole learning and teaching experience. So it gives students an opportunity, take learning styles, for example, whatever your view of learning styles, we all do prefer to learn in different ways. Moodle will allow visual students to look, students who prefer to listen can listen, provided you design the tools right. Those who want to read can read, but you can have a blend of all those possible experiences. You can have interactions, challenges in the form of quizzes, for example. You can allow students to design some learning, teaching and assessment of their own. All those possibilities are there in a way that is creative, in a way that empowers the student, in a way that I can set it up so it allows me to see their progress. So yeah, I guess I'm giving you a kind of rundown of some of the things that I've learned to like about it. So going from being a skeptic initially to saying, okay, there's a lot that's possible here to get my students on that journey to achieving the learning outcomes.
It's really enhanced your sort of teaching as a result.
Definitely. There's a whole new set of dimensions there. I wouldn't say it's replaced the classroom, but it's certainly changed the way I would like to use it.
So having gone through all this process with Moodle in the past, how do you think it's going to affect the way you approach it in Plymouth within your programme as part of the new digital learning environment?
I think what I need to stay close to is that key learning point that your learning and teaching methodology, my learning and teaching methodology, needs to drive what I'm trying to achieve. So on the personal front, I think what I've decided is that I'm going to take one key module and work very hard to make that a good learning experience for the students. There'll be other material that I'm teaching that I guess under pressure of time I can't develop it as well as I would like to in the first instance, but I think that's probably just good time management. Doing one task really well before you move on to the next one is probably a good lesson for all of us. So if I can stick to that, it might be that for 2014, 2015, that module is really good. For 2015, 2016, I'll apply the same principles that I've learned to some of the other modules. So
it's an ongoing process, really. Everything will evolve in time.
I think that's right.
Well, I'd like to thank you for sharing all your sort of experience with us today, Gary. It's really useful. I'm sure it'll be really helpful for some of the people who are going to be looking to be working with Moodle later this year as part of the digital learning environment project we've got running here in Plymouth. So if you want to find out more about the support that's in place for that project, have a look at the links at the end of this video. Thank you.